Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, or whenever you happen to be listening to this. Welcome to the Film Realist Podcast, the film and TV podcast from a complete nobody. That is hopefully for somebody. My name is Kyle Naranya, and welcome to episode 179, where on this week's episode of the show, I will be reviewing Avatar, Fire and Ash, the third adventure in Pandora. Was it worth the 2-year wait? You're going to have to wait and see. As this is a feature film review, there will be a non-spoiler section as well as a spoiler section. No need to worry, time codes will be listed in the description. Let's get back to Pandora with Avatar, Fire, and Ash.
Look, I'm a Marine. I'm not taking a knife to a gunfight. Or a prayer. So what am I supposed to do? I can't run. I can't fight. Well, that's right. Awa will provide.
Now, this is definitely worth addressing just because people might have an opinion about what I went into this movie feeling, because I did not love Avatar: Way of Water. I did my trailer reactions to this. I was fortunate enough to see the first trailer early ahead of the screening of Fantastic Four: First Steps, and I really liked a lot of what was established in those trailers. It was compelling to me to have a group of Na'vi that were going to be siding with the humans, or at least fighting against the other Pandorians, the other Na'vi. I thought that was really interesting, just to see how, even though this was the third film in the franchise, it had a feeling that it was much more like the second installment, and then things were really going to get insane with Avatar 4 and 5 that are planned. Unfortunately, that is not the feelings that I left leaving the movie. The first to address is the most obvious. The visual spectacle of these films is absolutely incredible. What's really interesting is that so much of what was awe-inspiring about all the work done on this franchise between 2 and 3 is obviously the water and what Weta is able to do with visual effects. This is the bleeding edge of what is capable. Weta, as the main studio, is absolutely incredible with what they are able to do. Your brain will just accept that this world exists, and there's nothing about it that at all feels unrealistic outside of the giant tall blue people, but from a pure definition of the supreme capabilities of these studios, it's absolutely incredible. And yeah, it can be completely captivating to be thrown into this adventure and be blown away by that spectacle. But a movie that is 3 hours and 15 minutes, unfortunately, I don't think pure awe-inspiring spectacle because of the quality of the visual effects is enough to justify that runtime. It's incredibly frustrating, and I can get into specifics in in full spoilers, that so much of this movie feels like a complete rehash of what we had in The Way of Water. That movie had to do a lot of legwork of sort of pushing the franchise forward by giving us Jake's family and all of those interpersonal dynamics that really do change everything about this franchise. It's no longer about the Pocahontas framework of outsider meeting the native of the land and then falling in love. We usually don't get to see more of that story, and we did with Way of Water, and it did establish different cultures within the world of Pandora, and we got to learn about the aquatic-based Na'vi, and that was really cool. Antagonistic Na'vi does really change things, and the emphasis of fire does work as a metaphor within the movie. Fire is obviously something of passion and hate and violence. It destroys as well as creates, and some of those metaphors, maybe they're just similes, are used within the storytelling of the movie. But when you are this long a film, you really need to have a focus as opposed to putting everything in the movie. It is quite frustrating that over 9 hours now into this, not over 9, it's probably just under 9 hours into this franchise, that I still have a hard time caring about these main characters. The exploration of Jake and his relationship with Neytiri is sort of sidestepped for other things. What's more frustrating about that is in having kids or expanding the Sully family, adding children, you made it more complicated to explore any of them specifically. We killed one off in Way of Water, but the arc of one of those characters is essentially the same. And that's really frustrating because you did take some big swings in Way of Water, but to see the same sort of story get brought back was incredibly frustrating because it proved that we are sort of running out of ideas. Many of the arcs of this main cast are incredibly stereotypical, and I know people are probably screaming that the simplicity of this is what works, and I don't necessarily disagree with that opinion. The simplicity of the first film was something that everybody could understand and everybody could follow. There weren't that many characters, and the expansion of the second one and focusing on a different rare thing that lived on this planet, the brain gel of the whales that would help lead to immortality in humans, and then you had the culture shock with the two different Navis. You had the sky Navis and the water Navis, and we're different than you, but you can learn to be one of us. That's the simplicity of Way of Water, but there's so much more to it where you have somebody raised not of those people with Spider, and Spider's probably got the most interesting arc in the movie as a whole, but the Sullys I don't care about where they go on specifically. Neytiri is a compelling character because she is so perfectly portrayed by Zoe Saldana, but the way that she's treated in this movie really frustrates me because the most obvious, and someone maybe argue would be stereotypical, what you could do with her character after the loss of her son in Way of Water, I wouldn't describe it as fridging, but it's not that far off because that is such a powerful and passionate character that it would be really interesting to see her go up against Una Chaplin's character, who I can't remember the name of the Na'vi off the top of my head, Varang, as the leader of the Mang Quan clan. That's the fire Na'vi. And using those characters almost mirrors for each other would be really interesting. But the movie seems to be in that camp of, we are going to show you everything because more is better. And there is a good story within this film. The problem is they feel the need to show you everything. Without getting into specifics, I felt that where the movie seemed to be winding down, that would have been an amazing springboard for the next film. Turns out I was incorrect because it was an hour and 15 minutes before the movie was over. So this was at the 2-hour mark, and it wound up giving us another hour and 15 minutes. A significant chunk of this movie sort of does fall in line with the beginning of Way of Water as well, which is we sort of just have to move characters around because we don't have anything inherently interesting to do with them. So we're just going to awe you with a bunch of really great nature that doesn't exist. Look at Pandora. It is an absolutely incredible planet that has been curated by everybody involved. Production design, all the visual effects, and just the atmosphere and the culture of these worlds. It's why people are wanting to visit it in Disney World in Orlando, Florida. In a movie, though, we just sort of wind up spinning our wheels and saying, hey, here's some interesting stuff, but we're going to sidestep that to continually do more things and more and more and more and more, to the point where you have so many things happening all at once that you don't really get to explore anything meaningfully. And to me, that's the most frustrating part of a movie that is 3 hours and 15 minutes. When you don't give enough focus to a certain number of characters, maybe a handful, but so many of them are sort of just around. We get to see Kate Winslet's character, which is fine because she's there. I like Kate Winslet and her husband Cliff Curtis, but those characters are just sort of part of the story. I don't really feel that there is an evolution of the connections of what was done in Way of Water. We just wind up doing the same thing, and that's a real problem. The final action set piece of this movie could be clipped from Way of Water and switched. And I feel that there's probably a fair amount of people who wouldn't notice. And to me, that's really frustrating because this is a franchise that is pretty much given everything. And to feel, and I can't remember where I read this, but this does feel like the most accurate explanation of this franchise, which is it does feel creatively bankrupt. We have run out of interesting things to do as a whole. We can have little interesting tidbits of story, but we don't really know what to do, so we're just going to give you something way too familiar, and that was incredibly disappointing to me, and I can explain more in spoilers. I don't have anything else to say that would not be a spoiler, so let's waste no more time, and maybe I'll talk for 3 hours about why I don't think this worked in the full spoiler section of the review.
That sounds like a fun weekend, but that's not what you really want.
What do I want?
What you've never had. An equal.
So in the aftermath of the fight in Way of Water with the death of Jake and Neytiri's daughter, she's incredibly sad, and that they weren't protected by the mother of the whole planet, and that's disappointing. And Neytiri's character sort of falls in this sadness and anger towards anything technically connected to the humans, and there are interesting conversations that happen because of that. But when you have a character like Una Chaplin's Varang, who is somebody who is very similar to Neytiri in a way where she's vicious and she's a leader and she's in control, and you could have used those characters as an interesting mirror that would have shown how they could be reflections based on how they're feeling. Varang hates the other Na'vi clans, and Neytiri, in this fit of rage, is dealing with the loss of a child, and her hatred towards the humans is only as exemplified by the humans still being around. Even though they won this battle at the end of Way of Water, they're continuing to do what they did in the last film, and continuing to see the gathering of the whale brain gel thing is fine enough because it's been proven through Way of Water that the humans are more interested in this resource. This is one of the reasons that they're on this planet, is they want to farm all of the resources and potentially make it a livable planet for the humans one day. And there's a comment on the gentrification of this planet for humans, and this is a long time thing that James Cameron has been talking about. One of the other stories that is maybe the most interesting is Spider's dealing with not being a native to the planet. He's got these breathing masks, and they're continually having problems when the plot demands it, and ultimately winds up through Sigourney Weaver's character, who's, I have forgotten the name of it, Kiri, is able to get the mother of the planet to make him a native, where his body, from a cell standpoint, adapts, which would be a very big problem for the Na'vi if humans were able to do this and survive on the planet. So initially, they're just going to get rid of him and send him off with Remus Lupin from Harry Potter or Ares from Wonder Woman, but ultimately they decide to stay together because they're a family. Part of the family drama of this movie is Jake's son, who survived the last film, disappointed him and won't make him proud, which was pretty much his arc from the last film. And you'd think that would be easier because he's got one less son to worry about. It makes sense why Neytiri's dealing with the loss, because she's always had a hybrid child. Even though Jake is in full Na'vi form, he still has more fingers, which separates the artificially created Na'vi from the natives of the planet. And this is the back and forth that they deal with, and how he responds to trauma, and how he's really pushing it down because he just wants to go on to the next fight. Again, interesting stuff to see in what he deals with. The moment I mentioned in non-spoilers is when Jake gives himself up for the safety of all of the other Na'vi because he's refusing to fly on his big scary dragon thing from the first film. I thought it made sense from a story standpoint to break him out and that be the ending of the film. You end on a moment of triumph only to realize that there's so much more to go. Given where the movie sets everything up, I thought that would have been a great conclusion for a movie that's maybe 2 hours and 20 minutes, maybe 2 hours and 30 minutes, because at that point, we have seen Stephen Lang's character start to indoctrinate himself into the Varang culture, the Mang Quan clan. He's starting to paint himself and really getting to see a whole new perspective on the planet from them. The two of them become very much a couple. He starts embracing their wardrobe as well as the painting, as I mentioned, and really does start to separate himself from the mission, even though his main focus, as it was in the last film, even though this is supposed to be a successfully run business, is taking down Jake Sully because he's a terrorist and destroying all of their things from trying to gather all the resources of the planet. I think that stuff's really cool. And if you end the movie on a moment of success, we've broken free, Neytiri and him reunite, but man, we still have a huge problem ahead of us with Na'vi working with the humans. What are we going to do about that? It's a great springboard for a sequel. Unfortunately, we have to keep going, which is we're going to gather up, and it turns out the whales that we saw from the last one, and I don't even want to talk about the whale culture that this movie has, and somebody acting in violence is kicked out of the clan. I did not find that remotely interesting whatsoever. We learned that the whales have this seasonal trip where they all gather because there's this almost supernatural thing that is happening to the planet, and the humans want to go there to gather all of the whale brain gel, and the Sullys meet up with all the other clans, as well as some people we saw in the very first one. Jake goes to the big sky dragon thing, and it's a great reunited moment. Look, it's the big scary thing that he learned to fly in Avatar 1 to fight off the humans. And what I said in non-spoilers that I found incredibly frustrating is this battle on the boats just happens to have more human tech outside of the speedboats we saw in the previous one. And so you just have more Na'vi, but the actual specific toe-to-toe fight between Stephen Lang and Sam Worthington is on a boat that happens to be on fire. If you ignore the cool spiritual cyclone that is shooting through the planet, it looks like the same action set piece. You have new villains who are fire-based, who could allow the film cinematically to have an entirely new language, but you have the same climax setting. And yeah, I know what people are going to say if you've seen the movie, and if you're listening to this and you didn't, I appreciate that. But eventually getting to the floating rock fight between Miles and Stephen Lang, and Spider being there because that's the one carry forward arc that we need to continually develop, where he does see him as a son, and his ultimate sacrifice for Spider is a good moment. But you spend so much of the movie just disliking this guy, and he seems so sleazy that, okay, ultimately he's going to do something for his son. I like the Spider stuff. I think it really does shake a lot of the opinions of the natively born Na'vi, that this could really be a problem for us, and seeing how people deal with what that really means. Kiri's whole thing in this movie about being unnaturally born and being able to connect to the mother, and, well, you can't do it because you might die, but then you're going to wind up doing it anyways, and her and Spider really do have like a Guardians of the Galaxy moment where they're holding hands and we're going to push through and be able to communicate. But a character that feels like she's supposed to be much more meaningful outside of that one big moment just kind of leaves you with nothing. And I'm incredibly frustrated by this. I did not go into this movie wanting to not like it. It is an investment of time seeing a movie that is 3 hours and 15 minutes. But these characters and the arcs that they have gone on, specifically over the last two movies, yes, they are incredibly predictable. I don't have a problem with predictable storylines, but when you have characters and you don't effectively weave them through where they feel meaningful to when they are happening. The only part of this film that I liked at all is the back and forth between Jake and Neytiri. That is a long history that we have participated with in some degree. Obviously, time had passed between the first one and Way of Water, so that way their children could be slightly grown up. But Jake's son going off to be with one of the water whales because it was exiled from its clan, it's just so tedious and nonsensical. Overall, yeah, it adds whales to the final fight, and the spectacle of, like, the visuals are incredible, and I am captivated by looking at them, but I don't care about these people. I have spent 8 hours, 6 specifically, with this new crop of characters, and if we are going to pivot to focusing on the children, they have not been well developed. Also, something I could not believe is this movie has what is random narration from, and I don't remember the name of the character, and I want to say it's, yes, Loak. Loak randomly narrates. It is not consistent. It is just so they can tell you what's happening. And in a movie that is this long, if you cannot explain that through characters' conversations and visuals, you have not told a good story if you just have to tell us what matters. Ultimately, these movies are going to live and die by people being blown away by how they look. They are incredible. This is the most impressive visual effects I have ever seen. Way of Water did a lot of legwork for that. Between those, we also had Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, which was also a Weta production. I am really frustrated by James Cameron furthering this franchise by giving us more sequels, but these movies fail to do anything that is as interesting as the first film. The 2 films we've had in the last 2 years are incredible because of how they have pushed technology forward, but simplicity has always been the best tool in James Cameron's toolbox. I like Terminator and Terminator 2 and True Lies. Those movies are not overly complicated. They are successful based on the simplicity, as well as its exploration of different sci-fi elements. This movie proved to me that they don't have an interesting story to tell anymore, because even if this functioned as the conclusion, it really isn't one, because there are so many loose threads left for number 4. I think this movie, just purely on plot, is boring, and it is way too long. There is probably a really great movie in here somewhere, but it is not the movie that I saw in 3D IMAX, which was awesome to look at, but it is not a movie I'm compelled to recommend for people who are not looking forward to the visual spectacle. I went and saw this in completely regular 2D just so I could see the Avengers Doomsday teaser that I don't understand why that wasn't released in theaters, but that's a whole different conversation. I am very frustrated that I didn't like this movie. There are parts I enjoyed, but overall I thought it was a slog. So those are my thoughts on Avatar, Fire, and Ash.
Can I ask you a question? Just fun?
There's something I've been meaning to ask you.
I ask the questions, you answer the questions.
Why do you ask questions to which you already know the answers?
Did that count as a question?
Yes.
Damn it.
Last week's question of the week was, what is your favorite James Cameron film? Jermaine Jones writes in True Lies with Terminator 2, which are neck and neck. I'm shocked by that because Terminator 2 feels like it's so far and above of True Lies, but thanks, Jermaine, for your answer. Wayne Ezard said Terminator 2 and True Lies. Okay, Jermaine, you're not alone. Blair Brown, Terminator 2 is awesome. People forget it's shot as if Arnold is the bad guy. That surprise that he is the protagonist is only seen in the first view. Also, Aliens is amazing. Motion sensors pinging there in the ceiling. Cool story with James Cameron pitched the sequel to Alien. He wrote the word alien on the board, then walked up and added an S with a $sign. Yeah, I've heard about that. It's maybe one of the most famous sequel stories of all time. Jillian Jones writes in, the answer is, of course, Titanic. All right, thanks for that, Jill. Scotty Cameron writes in, it's T2 Judgment Day. Is there any real competition aside from Terminator or Aliens? You have Conan the Barbarian trying to protect John Connor from the New Age CEO Shane Langston. Sarah Connor's arc of learning to trust the new T8-100 and see him as a father figure to John, and the only thing that can stop the T-1000 is extremely compelling. Also, the climactic battle between Mr. Freeze and the White Dragon is just awesome. James Cameron, nor the Terminator franchise has been able to top Terminator 2. And then Dylan writes in, this is interesting, I refuse to pick one, so I'm going to give you my top 3 in no particular order. Aliens, Terminator, and Terminator 2 are near perfect movies. Still, if you're B tier as a director is stuff like True Lies, Titanic, Avatar, The Abyss. That's how you get to be one of the best ever. James Cameron movies are at least always good. What's your favorite, Kyle? You know, I've been thinking about this, Dylan, because I know you posted this on Monday morning, so it's been a week. I've had time to think about it. It's probably Aliens. Terminator 2 is absolutely incredible, but there's something about the iconography of Aliens as an action franchise, and I recently reviewed Predator Badlands, and I just love the way that those genres and those franchises kind of blend together. Terminator 2 is absolutely incredible, but I do really love Aliens. Yeah, I think it's probably Aliens. Thank you to everybody who submitted their answers for question of the week. Very much appreciated. It makes it very interesting to see a wide variety, although most of these answers were kind of what I suspected, if I'm being totally honest. This week's question of the week is Stranger Things inspired. So it's a relatively simple question, but I'm curious because I think there's going to be a wide variety of answers. What is your favorite season of Stranger Things? To let me know, you can comment below. You can email the podcast, filmreelistspod@gmail.com, or you can answer directly on YouTube and Spotify. I look forward to all those answers, and you can look forward to me reacting to them on my review of Stranger Things Season 5, Volume 2. That's going to be next week's review, and then that is going to be it for the year. 2025 has been an absolutely incredible year for the podcast. So many things have changed. I've gotten press and screener access. Thank you to everybody who approved me for that. It's made a lot of changes to the show. I hope for the better. I am really hoping to get the YouTube channel for the podcast to 500 subscribers by the end of the year. So if you haven't done that yet, please consider doing so. If you have a film fan that you think would enjoy the show, have them do it there. You're welcome to subscribe on any of your favorite podcast platforms, but the YouTube one would be absolutely incredible. Next week's episode will be of Stranger Things Season 5, Volume 2, but you can also look forward to my favorite films and favorite shows of 2025 and my most anticipated films and shows of 2026. That's going to be in an upcoming episode, so make sure you're following so you don't miss it. If you would like to submit your 3 favorite films of the year to me, I can react to them as well as question of the week responses. Thank you so much to everybody for listening to the podcast. My name is Kyle Naranya, and I will see you next time.